this is most of the stuff needed, right? The most important things are here, right? So what you have to know is the supercharger is not included into the kit. You have to find it locally. I bought two so far. One I paid 150 euros, the other one maybe 300 shipped. So it's not that expensive. You want to make sure you buy a good condition one, so do some searching about that. What you need is this M45 supercharger, which is only mounted on the Mini Cooper S, early 2000 car. You need the Cooper S version with a 65 mil wheel. There's an John Cooper Works version with a smaller wheel. You don't need that, you need this one, because I designed the crank, the driving pulley to work with a 65 mil wheel, right? This is very important because you're putting this on an old, probably an old engine, right? So you don't want to push too much, right, air through it. So the whole system is designed to run at 0.2 bar, and you need to get the 65 mil pulley supercharger. Otherwise, the belt won't fit. The belt will be too long, and if you find a belt that it will work, then you will have too much boost, and yeah, I don't know what will happen, right? Especially because the setup is not intercooled, right? No intercooler included. Maybe I'll do an intercooler update or upgrade for the kit, but so far it's non-intercooled 0.2 bar. So from my experience, or what I've driven the car in the last year, this 0.2 bar is more than enough, right? It's very fun to drive. Feels like an electric car. The response is very quick. Anyway, so the supercharger, right? You just need to attach two parts to it. The inlet of the supercharger is here. It draws air through here. I designed this piece to be glued. You glue it with this stuff that I include in the kit. It's a silicone sealant. So you will just prep the supercharger, put the black stuff here, just glue it on, right? Bolt it and let it cure. So this is one part that goes onto the supercharger. It's the inlet. The outlet is this plate here that you also need to seal. So before you bolt it, you have to put the same black stuff, right? You have to put all around, right, to seal. Especially in this around this bolt, you have to put all around the hole, and then you bolt it on. It's bolted with 4 screws, right? And there's one aspect you really need to pay attention to. It's one of the screws is inside the inside the tube where the air moves. You really want to pay attention to 2 things. One, don't drop anything like the screw or washer there. 2, maybe it's a good idea to put a drop of thread lock or Loctite, right, on this screw that goes in there. Again, make sure you tighten it. Don't forget it. And then when you glue this inlet in, and you glue the outlet, and you bolt it on, then the supercharger is more or less ready to go into the car. To prepare the supercharger for the installation, you need to do 3 things. You have to attach the and the outlet with these 4 screws. You need to apply sealant, which is provided into the kit. You have to apply it all around to make a seal for the outlet, and you have to do a similar job for the inlet, right? You have to add sealant here and just clamp it in. The third thing you need to do is block this port here. There's a hole or a port for the supercharger, which I don't know what exactly is it used for in the Mini, but you just need to put a screw in here with some of this sealant and to block it off, right? So that's how the sealant should look like. Make sure you seal that all around. These don't matter, but that one does, because the bolt goes in here, so you need to seal around it. Right? After you've put on the black stuff, you can just lay this on and screw it in place. So to seal the inlet of the supercharger, you should turn it upside down once you've done the outlet, and just apply a generous amount of sealant on this area here, right, on the outside, and also on the inside of this. Try not to get any on the inside of the air channel. Try to do a good job on sealing this. This is important to have a good seal, otherwise you draw air. Don't put too much stuff, black stuff there, but if it goes a little bit on the outside like this, I think it's fine. When you add the glue, then push this firmly all the way in, flat, to be fully home with the supercharger. You have to let this cure for a few hours at least. This stuff is curing fully, I think, in 24 hours, but in 2 or 3 hours it's acceptable to mount it. Alright, so earlier when I recorded the videos of how to prepare the supercharger and assemble it into the car, I forgot something. I may have even said that the supercharger will stay intact for this installation, which is not the case. After assembly there is no problem, the supercharger could stay intact, but for ease of assembly these pink marked areas, they need to go. Right? So you can either saw them off, or I used a saw to take them off on my old charger. This is my new charger and I forgot to take them off, right? So first thing you have to do is remove these bits here. You just have to be, let's say you start from that, come on, from that corner and go down. You have to look around so that you don't cut into important stuff, right? But yeah, you just have to take this off. What this does, if you take them off, you don't have to bend the brake lines out of place too much. Otherwise, the brake lines that go into the master cylinder, they may interfere with these bits. And one very important aspect, that is the inlet of the supercharger, right? And there's another piece coming here. If you don't cut this off and you install the supercharger, you won't be able to assemble it. So the easiest thing is to just chop them off, right? Cut them off. So in total you need to do 4 things to the supercharger. Cut these ears off, these pink marked things off. You have to apply sealant and bolt the outlet. One of the screws is in here. You have to be very careful. You should do this on the table, not on the car. You have to make sure you don't drop this in or wash or anything into the supercharger. It's very dangerous, obviously. Maybe a drop of Loctite on this bolt is a good idea. Then what else you have to do is you have to glue the supercharger inlet, and then there's this port here, right? You just have to put a screw in there and then some of this black sealant, so it doesn't draw air through there. I don't know, this is a port normally used for something else on the original car, on the Mini, but we don't use it, so we just plug it off. So here's how it looks after the chop job. This will allow for much easier assembly. And this is actually just a plate here in the back of the supercharger, which is used for the water pump or something in the Mini. It's really not relevant to the 924 application. Alright, so my car is already dismantled since I took off the prototype kit and swapped it over to my buddy's car, and I haven't reverted it to original. I just waited until I finish my next generation kit. So, but basically I just threw it all together like that to show you. You start with something like that. This is, you have here your metering head, the expansion, coolant expansion tank, and then this is more or less the original position and orientation of this rubber thing for the inlet. Here it's missing the plastic and then the other rubber. So what you need to do, of course, is take all this stuff off, right? This you have to save, reuse, and then unbolt things. You have to unbolt the fuel in and out, and then take this whole thing out. It's flexible enough to move and put on top of the manifold like that. Now, normally you can take everything out, right, including this tank and all the stuff, and do a, let's say, proper clean installation, but yeah, you can just unbolt them and move them out of the way. It works like that as well. So one thing you have to do to the car, right? It's either before you take the inlet rubber and metering unit out, or after, doesn't matter. But you have to put the crank pulley on, right? So this is the crank pulley that's included into the kit. It goes obviously onto the crank, right? So that's how it should look after you install the crank pulley. It's secured by these M8 screws. You remove the factory ones and you put the ones that are included into the kit. Now, you may need to undo the big central bolt which holds the timing sprocket to the crankshaft. Mine, on this car, it had a washer that was not in the center somehow. The inner diameter of the washer was a little bit bigger, and I couldn't fit the crank, right? I couldn't fit the crank pulley. So the crank pulley is made to fit snugly to the crank diameter, and if you encounter difficulties in assembling this, it means the washer for the central screw, it's not sitting in the center, and you have to undo it, this big screw. It's a 24 millimeters socket. You may need an impact wrench or a big lever to undo it. Put the washer in nice and centered, and then tighten it back up. Then you're able to put this pulley on. So here's the first of the 3 modifications you need to do to the components of the car. So no permanent mods, right, to the car body or anything. You need to modify 3 components: a bracket, one of these rubber tubes, and the airbox. The bracket I'm talking about, it's the one that holds the oil dip stick. So you see mine's already bent closer to the inlet manifold of the engine. Normally it sits there, but what you need to do is take this bracket off completely, then just bend this until it's in that position close to the manifold. So the modification: you need to take this bracket off, bend the dipstick housing so that this touches the manifold like that, and then you need to reverse this small feature here. Now originally it's on the outside. You have to unscrew it completely, move it on the inside so that you can use the same bracket, right? So if you can imagine, if you reverse this there, it will still hold the bracket in place. Also, the permanent modification you need to do on this component is you need to chop it off. You need to cut it off right here. So no need no space for the rear side of this bracket. So I reversed it, right? And now I'm gonna take it off and cut it. So let me try to see. So this, let's see. Okay. So this was on the outside here. I moved it to the inside. I bent this all the way close to the manifold, and now I'm gonna cut it here where the marking is, right? So cut it as short as possible. You only need a little bit of support. This bit has to go out. There's no room for the supercharger because of this. So that's how it should look like after you modify it. So compared to the original, this feature here, this hook, is reversed. It's not on the outside, it's on the inside. The bracket is cut here because the pipes of the supercharger come here and there's just not enough space. This bracket, you can if you decide to restore your car to original, you can buy a new bracket or find a source used one. It's very cheap. The purpose of this bracket is just to hold the housing so it won't come out in that direction, right? So it's a bit more difficult to check the oil now, but not too difficult, right? So you can check it. This is the first, let's say, semi-permanent modification you have to do. Alright, so with the airbox out of the way and the metering head move it on top, and the expansion tank just dangling there. You can now mount the rear bracket, right? It's held by two M8 screws. You need a 6mm Allen key. The bracket is installed like so. So the front bracket you have to pre-assemble. You can only install it in one way, right? Otherwise it won't fit the block. So you have two shorter M10 screws. You put the two spacers in, and then you just find its place. Alright, so the front bracket has three spacers. Two of them go first on the block. The third one you can just slide in like this. Don't tighten these two, just let them loose, so you can fit the third bolt is the longer one. So what you need to do is to use this tensioner arm pre-assembly like this, right? So it's tensioner arm, and then it goes into the bracket like so. There's a bit of a wiggle to be had with the coolant pipe. I have to either lift it or lower it a little bit, but you can do it. Alright, this goes here, like so, and then you find the hole, and then you assemble it. So after you assemble the front and rear brackets and the tensioner arm, this is what you should look like. This is don't tighten anything on the front, just these two you can tighten from the very beginning. They stay there nice and tight. These you have to let loose until you put the charger in, and then you tighten everything at the end. Another thing you have to take care of is before you put any bolts into these holes on the block, these two and these three, you should at least use an air compressor to blow out the dirt. If not, use a tap to clean the threads. Before you put the supercharger in, there's this rubber foot. Normally this is 90 degrees turn, right? So it's the long way across. You have to unbolt that and turn it to make room for the more room for the supercharger here. The supercharger will come pretty close to it. Another thing that you have to do before assembling the supercharger into the engine bay is to replace the fuel return line. The factory setup comes with this urethane, or I don't know, plastic thing. You have to cut it and replace it with the line provided into the kit. So you have to cut it from two places, one on the metering head and one down there. Now mine is just plugged, otherwise it will we would have fuel all over. But this part goes there. You just remove this old plastic bit and then replace it with this one. So here it is installed. Now you don't necessarily have to do this. I did this on my car and on my buddy's car, but on the prototype version I ran with the original line. If you don't do this, you will have a really hard time tightening that. The original setup has this plastic line. It's not, you can't take it off easily, or maybe if you heat it up, I don't know. What I did on the prototype was just to unscrew it from there, leave it dangling here, and yeah, then I had a really tough time to tighten it back there, because you can imagine the supercharger is here and you have absolutely no access. It's really tough. So I will include this into the kit. It's a new fuel grade line with two clamps. I will use it on my car. It's up to you if you want to use it or not. So recap, before you put the supercharger into the engine bay, you need to check a few things. Bracket, modified, bolted on. Bracket of the oil dipstick housing. Crank vent routed correctly and in place. Rear bracket of supercharger tightly bolted to the block. Front bracket assembly of the supercharger with all three bolts assembled onto the block but not tightened. Rubber foot of metering head turned 90 degrees in line with the car. Normally it's fuel return line replaced and tightened. Yeah, that's about it. With all the things checked and prepared for the engine bay and the supercharger prepared, the easiest way I found to assemble is maybe to have two persons, right? But one person is enough. So what I do is hold the supercharger from underneath with one hand, use this long rod, put it from the outside with a nut and a washer, something like that. Put the rod in and then use this rod and the rear bracket as a guide. So the supercharger goes in aligned with the rear end first, and what you want is to place the rod on top of the rear bracket first, right? This is the guide. You just lower it in place and then you place it on top. Now it's maybe not so easy to see, but I've placed it on top. What you do next is you support it from underneath. You slide with one hand the bolt outwards, just enough. Then you lower the supercharger a little bit, and then you slide the rod back in. And then you can let go. It's more or less into position. The next thing is the shorter of the two M8 bolts. This goes first, connects the supercharger to the front bracket. This is the first bolt you have to tighten. Then you have to tighten the rear rod, right? And then the other two for the front bracket. You don't necessarily have to tighten the bolt that holds the tensioner, because you will undo it completely and take it out completely anyway when you put the belt on. One of the most difficult things to do when assembling this kit is to place that washer and nut. Right, so there's a rod that connects the supercharger to the rear bracket. There's very little space there. Also, this crank vent hose is in the way. What you can do is pull it out a little bit, and with your left hand and two fingers you can put the washer and nut on. This is the easiest way I found. Next is the belt. To put the belt in, you need to be done with positioning and tightening the supercharger onto the block, meaning the rear is tightened, the front is tightened, these two bolts are tightened, and then you have to take this long one complete with the tensioner out, so you can just place the belt, right? After you place the belt on, you take the spacer stays in place because the other bolts are tightened, so you know the bolt will easily go through. You take the tensioning assembly. You have to take the bolt out, place the tensioner in place, and then put the bolt through. Then you have to use these two keys here to adjust the tension, and then you're pretty much done with putting the supercharger into the engine bay. Before you adjust the tension in the belt, don't forget to mount this bolt, right? This is the longer M8. This bolt you will tighten absolutely last. This is the last one. After you put the tensioner and you adjust the tension in the belt, you tighten its screw, its bolt, and then you do this one. And then it's time for the plumbing. The first bit of plumbing that you have to do, right, is the supercharger inlet mating, right? This is the lower supercharger inlet. This you glued already to the supercharger with the black stuff, and you assemble the supercharger with this part glued into the engine bay. What you have to do next is this part has to fit like so, right? And the sealing between these two is done again by applying this black sealant. The black sealant has to be applied in this area, just on top of this stopper. Normally you can do this when the supercharger is outside the engine bay, but yeah, you can also do it after the supercharger is installed to avoid yeah, getting stuff dirty. So yeah, just apply a generous amount of sealant all around all this area. Imagine that this part will have to just slide in like that and seal on that. After you've applied the sealant between the two pieces of supercharger inlet, you can also smear some of that black stuff on the inside of this. This bit is assembled a little bit more difficult. What you have to do is undo this bracket, which normally sits there, so that you have enough space. And this part, you have to rotate it like this and fit it in between the inlet manifold and the brake booster. It really helps if you take the dipstick out, the oil dipstick out completely. You have to keep it at this angle, lower it, pass it under the accelerator cable, lower it in between the two parts. It requires absolutely no force. After you lowered it below the level of the booster, you just have to rotate it. Right? The clutch cable may be a little bit in the way. You have to put it like so, and then you just rotate this part in. And then when you've rotated it into position, into the right orientation, you have to look for the guiding bushing here. So look below and then just lower it in place. Normally it should look like this. After that you can just put the bracket back on and use the long M6 to secure the supercharger inlet to the manifold. Next up is your boot. This port here, you see it's chopped up. You have to cut properly and plug. Normally this sits like so, and this connects to the brake booster lines, but we don't use it, and there's no space for this, so you have to cut this short and plug it with a bolt and the black sealant that I provided. You have to install this. The way you do it is first into the maybe this bolt, leave it a little bit unbolted so you have enough space for the rubber to slide in, like so, and then just pop it onto the metering head. And be very careful when you install this boot. First of all, don't damage the plastic part, the inlet for the supercharger. Don't forget to tighten this bolt, but only very slightly, maybe 5 Newton. And when you install this, be very careful to make sure it's properly seated, so you don't draw false air through here. You especially don't want to draw false air through a forced induction system. It's dangerous. Okay, so all the air connections in front of the supercharger are really important. The other ones are important as well, but these are really important because if you don't get these properly sealed, the metering head will not provide enough fuel, and the supercharger will provide more air, so you will run very lean. So take your time, work slowly, and do a proper job to make sure all the parts are assembled and sealed correctly. Here's the final modification on car parts. Normally there's a bent hose like this that takes vacuum from the manifold from here and brings it to the brake booster. So this part, this hose, you have to cut right about here after the bend, and you have to inline this part, which is included into the kit. It's a T, and then use another part of this hose to connect it to the brake booster, right? And then the operation for the recirculation valve is driven by vacuum from this part. So here's how I did mine. Like I said, I cut that, I turned it a little bit that way. I used the straight part to connect to the brake booster, and then spliced the T here and connected the mushroom of the recirculation valve to the same vacuum. All right. Obviously, don't forget the clamps. I didn't use any clamps because I'm just demonstrating the assembly. Before you start the car, you try to start the car, go over everything, bolts, clamps, connections. Maybe you forgot something like I did here. For example, this is the wiring that goes to this valve, right? So I completely forgot to put it under. Now I'm gonna have a hard time routing this underneath. So have a look at these videos a few times before you start the project, otherwise you have to take stuff apart and put it in again, and we don't want that. Especially these bits are not so easy. Anyway, so after you're done, right, all the bolts are tight, fuel is connected and tight, electrical connections, clamps, all the vacuum stuff is on. It's time to start the car. Absolutely do not forget to tighten this stuff up. Everything after the throttle body, right, has to be really tightened up properly. Otherwise, yeah, you have an open throttle and it's not good. So before you start the car, do again 2 times, 3 times checking, check everything, and again that you're really done with tightening and putting all the parts in the right orientation, and you didn't forget anything. Normally, this is how your engine bay should look like, right? After the complete assembly. You can't see anything here. It's just this boot is turned instead of going that way, and you just have these black things, black pipes coming out and going into the throttle body. Now, my car has this purple blow-off valve. The one that I'll include in the kit will be just gray, no colors, right? All the connectors will be black, so normally it should look very factory-ish. One aspect when you handle this thing, this recirculation valve, be careful. It's not very sturdy. Don't pull on the mushroom too much. It's plastic, right? The same goes for all the 3D printed parts. One more thing, the crank vent. So I haven't addressed it yet. Normally this line that we routed close to the manifold comes to the front. There's a 90 degrees elbow, and you can connect it to the airbox underneath. If you don't want to do this, this will probably get some oil and some yeah, it will get the air filter a little bit dirty, and put oil through this oil mist through the metering head, the supercharger, and all the way back into the intake. If you don't want to do this, you can always buy an oil catch can and mount it somewhere. I don't know. Here, I will do this, but what's included in the kit is the possibility to connect it to the airbox, more or less like Porsche did on the 924 Turbo. One thing you have to do before you drive and you put any load on the engine and on the system is you should normally have the timing set to whatever 6 degrees BTC or whatever the manual says. What you need to do is to retard the ignition a little bit, maybe 3 degrees, not more, right? So this means undoing this 13mm bolt, marking your position of the distributor and turning about 3-4 degrees clockwise. This will retard the ignition curve completely. You need to do this, otherwise you're running too much advance and you will hear it ping, right? Anyway, so you've started the car. It should idle and work right away, in the same way you left it before you install the supercharger. Don't go pushing the car around too much, because you don't know how your mixture is. Normally, I advise to install a wideband sensor and a gauge to really know where you at fueling. But I've done this without, right? I've done the whole development and the whole year and a half of testing and driving without. What I did was just take it slow. Don't go rallying immediately after you've done installing the supercharger. A very, let's say, effective way of knowing how your fueling is obviously looking at the plugs. What I do is I drive the car in normal way. I try to push it only a little bit. I'm very careful and I listen to the engine. You just run the car normally a little bit. Don't drag race it or anything, right? Don't put too much stress onto it. And then you go home. You immediately shut the engine off, and you take the plug number 1 out, and you have a look at the color. What you want to see is brown, light brown color, maybe a little bit of black, right? But not white. When the plug is white, then you obviously have not enough fuel, and then you have to either adjust the metering head for more fuel and check that you're not losing air somewhere and don't have a problem there. if the plugs are black, obviously you have a little bit too much fuel. Again, you probably need to adjust the metering head and check if you have any leaks or in your plumbing. All right, yeah, this is pretty much it. It's not a walk in the park, but it's not rocket science either. So with some patience, some basic tools, and this guide, you should be able to assemble your supercharger kit and enjoy your 924.